So I'll stop you at exactly after 15 minutes. All right, as your chairman. So please oblige.
Are you ready for me?
Yes, Daktari, we are ready for you. Most welcome. Let's give Daktari a big hug.
I can actually see myself, so that's a good thing. The way this thing will work is that it'll be very, very brief indeed. I will speak, and I think, Victoria, if you're hearing me, you will move the slides. And one of the most dangerous things in the world is to talk to hungry people. And even if it's not obvious to you, I can see you're all very hungry and want to go wherever it is that you must go and have your lunch. And I know some people will also be going home after this. So I'll really be very, very brief indeed. The topic that was given to me was on mental wellness and insurance, the past, present, and the future. And I'll start off very quickly by asking you to have a look at the next slide, which actually tells you what it is that we are talking about. In Kenya, this year in June, the president then signed into law the Mental Health Amendment Act of 2022, which defines our conversation for today as follows: that we are talking about a person with mental illness, which means a person diagnosed by a qualified mental health practitioner to be suffering from such an illness, meaning that the diagnosis cannot be made by somebody who's passing by or somebody who is not trained in the field of mental health. For the diagnosis to have validity, oh my goodness me. All right, give me one moment. This is most peculiar. It must be on the ring. Who's calling? Victoria. Where did you call me? Let me talk to her. Huh? Yeah. Hello, can you hear me now? Can you hear me? No. Oh, let me see. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Let me log. Can you hear me now properly?
We're getting you, but if it could get louder from this side,
okay.
It'll be okay.
Let me log in again. No, let me, if he's not hearing me properly, let me log in again.
No, that's okay. You can proceed. We are following from this end.
You're following from your end?
Yes.
Okay, fine. All right, so I'll continue. So I don't even, so I'll start all over again if that's okay with you. So this first slide is what we are talking about today, which is what is mental health and mental, according to the Kenyan law, which means that the diagnosis can only be made by a person who is qualified to make this diagnosis under Kenyan law. And I want to emphasize, because we are insurance people, almost an insurance person, at least in my past, that it's a person who's diagnosed with an alcohol or substance use disorder, and also people with suicidal ideation. These are the classical exclusions in the older insurance policies. So the point that I'm making is that the law has now caught up with us, and that is very clear. But I also want to make the point that the International Classification of Diseases recognizes upwards of 300 mental disorders. So I would suggest that those who wish to know which mental diseases we're talking about, a simple Google search will help us to do that. Victoria, next slide, please. This next slide is about the past. Mental health, very interestingly, has followed very closely on the evolution of our country over the years. Before colonialism, where people who had mental illnesses were bewitched and were treated by witch doctors. During the struggle for independence during the emergency, experts in mental health told the colonialists that anybody who is asking for his freedom has a mental illness. And fellows like Elijah Masinde were incarcerated at Mathare Hospital simply because they said that independence was a good thing. Following independence by 1967, very interestingly, almost surprising, Kenya put together the first insurance program. And I think it was Mwai Kibaki who was at the forefront of this activity. I went with three other colleagues to the United Kingdom in 1977 to train in psychiatry as a fully sponsored student by the Kenya and the British government. So really, Kenya from 1977 had started understanding the centrality and importance of the concept of mental health. In the 80s, however, we didn't take mental health as seriously as we could until suddenly, and then boom, it went. After the 1998 bomb blast, I don't know how many of you were there, everybody started talking counseling, mental health, and so on. And from 1998, Kenya has really done a lot in the field of mental health, a period that I call, for the sake of this presentation, the Renaissance. Next slide, please. By 2019, the retired President Kenyatta, Uhuru, formed a mental health task force, which I was asked to chair, which really represented a turning point for mental health in our country. Words like parity for mental health, meaning that mental health and physical diseases were to be treated as though they were all diseases affecting human beings, started coming up. COVID-19 was an incredible thing because it created a silver lining, because everybody who was scared of COVID issues wanted counseling. And so mental health and counseling came about to create what I call, for the sake of this presentation, a wind of change. And more people from Corona time are calling and coming to us without need to be persuaded. Sadly, at the same time, the global economy and all these things that we know, I've just seen when I was not able to hear you, that the British government has sacked its finance minister just now because of their policies, Paul Kwake. So things have been changing very rapidly indeed all around us. I have said this recently, that against all this and against all the uphill things that we have had, I have experienced in the last 3 or 4 years a very steady increase in the dialogue between mental health specialists and the insurance industry. And more of us are being invited to be in your midst. So the last bullet there says that there's a friendship developing between people who should really have been partners from the beginning. And the reason this friendship is coming on is because we are dialoguing, because we are talking to each other. Doctors and the other mental health specialists are understanding more and more why and how insurance companies exist. And the insurance companies are also understanding more and more what it is that the doctors and other mental health specialists have been saying over this time. Next slide, please. So let's look at the future now. Subsequent to the mental health task report, the government of its own motion carried out something very interesting called an investment case for mental health. Investment case for mental health was a scientifically driven investigation by the Kenya government, the World Health Organization, UNDP, and other stake players to show how much our country would get by investing properly in mental health. We also calculated how much we lose by not investing in mental health. In summary, what was found is that if over the next 5 to 10 years, we invested 80 billion shillings, sounds like a lot of money, the return on that investment would be upwards of 160 billion shillings, meaning that it makes sense at the macroeconomic level to invest in mental health. And I think we are working towards convincing ourselves that investing in mental health has substantial economic returns. The task force, if you look at the next 2 bullet points, are recommendations from the task force. And again, even with the new government, activities around declaration of mental health is a national priority. A commission for gross national happiness index are also ongoing. And I think we will be able to get this thing going in the next couple of years. Workplace assessment, as we've been told elsewhere, are generally now accepted, and only few companies now would not have heard of EAPs. Many people are running mental wellness programs. Many understand the significance of promotive healthcare. The science behind the reality that the earlier you diagnose any illness, but in particular mental illness, is effective. I don't think we need to go into that. I think it's now understood. The earlier you diagnose anxiety, depression, PTSD, the more effective and inexpensive the treatment becomes. And the last bullet point is that NHIF, I'm happy to report, now fully covers, without any form of discrimination, persons with mental health needs. Next slide, please. So what do we know in Kenya in relation to mental health? We know a lot. Anybody who tells you that the figures that we have are from the World Health Organization or are from scientists from America does not understand the literature. All those numbers that I have given you point to the fact that in Kenya, we know that we have a high burden of disease associated with mental disorders. The last bullet point might be of some interest to the insurance industry, because not only does the mental illness cause suffering, but it also reduces in some illnesses like schizophrenia, life expectancy by up to 20 years. So it's not only a cause of morbidity or ill health, it's also a cause of shortening of life expectancy. Next slide, please. Other things that we know is that caring for people with mental disorders is a heavy responsibility. We also know that there's a very big gap between the fact of mental illness and the availability of care. This is what is called mental health gap, the highest being around alcohol use disorder. But the last bullet point is what I want you to look at as an expert in the insurance industry. We have now accumulated data, accurate data, over the last 15 years and have checked across insurance companies. And what we have found is that if you look at your own insurance company where you work and calculate what it costs you to manage the health book in relation to the rest of the insurance book, none of you spends more than 1% of your overall expenses on insurance on mental health alone. Let me say this. If you cover mental disorders from depression, PTSD, ADHD, all of those ones, it will, and you cover it comprehensively, it will cost you about 1% of your entire medical book. And this, I have to tell you, goes as far as not just the private insurance companies, but also at NHIF. So what is the problem? The problem is that the calculations that are done only using chronic mental conditions. Because when people don't have the chronic mental health conditions, because of the past relationship between the insurance industry and the medical profession, each has been cheating the other one. So doctors hide mental health conditions by pretending they are that which they are not. That means that you as underwriters are not able to properly cost the proportion associated with mental disorders. And therefore, both of you are losing. This dialogue that is now taking place, where more and more doctors are telling you the truth, will get your actuaries to better calculate the risk of mental disorders, and you will be surprised by how inexpensive it is. You'd expect me to say this, but some of you will know that I have been associated with an insurance company over many years, and this I do know, and also I know this from other sources. In fact, I think it's the regulator who has helped us to find what I am suggesting here on the last bullet point. Next slide, please. Now, the other problem that we have is that really insurance coverage is a progressive step in many ways in our country. Anybody who tells you that Kenya has not made progress doesn't know what is going on in our country. My proposition, and I told you I'll be making a very brief presentation, is that with proper actuarial calculations based on truthful figures from the doctors and based on the goodwill from the insurance companies, everybody, including the insuring world, will do well. And I don't even think, this is the last bullet point there, that we need to be afraid of the provisions of the amended act. I know we all mean well. I know the Mental Health Act in amended form makes it a crime to exclude from cover people with mental health disorders. Next slide, please. But I wouldn't want us to go that route, because I believe sincerely that we have all seen light, and we don't need to have a rungu on our heads to make us do that which is proper and for our people. I think we are here to help and work with each other, and the provisions of the law are there, but I don't think we need to be afraid. In fact, go to the next slide, please. My proposition is that this kind of conversation that we are holding today between the citizens of the country, mental health service consumers, mental health experts like myself, the healthcare providers like Chiromo and other hospitals, the insurance institute, the insurance regulator, insurance companies themselves, and the government, we are all ready for a round table on mental health. And I think if we follow this particular approach, all of us will end up winners. Let me stop there because, not because you're very hungry, but because it's right for me to do so. And let me accept maybe one or two questions, then you must all go away and enjoy your food.
Thank you
very much. Thank you.
For that kind of a presentation, we can do much better than that. All right. Do we have a question for Daktari? Anybody in the room with a question? Right, we don't have questions, even with
hungry people cannot ask questions.
Exactly, we had very shocking statistics earlier that 1 in every 5 people will suffer some mental health in their lifetime.
Particularly if they are ever kept hungry.
Yeah. And when I look around the room, that point is
yeah.
But nonetheless, if you don't have any question, Dr. Jenga, thank you very much for such a wonderful, insightful presentation. I see a question at the back, just one question. At the back, please. All right. At the back. There is one question for you.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. You've given us the estimates of how mental health condition has an impact on the economic front in terms of, I think you mentioned something like about a loss of $1 trillion. But also, is there a study that has shown what kind of impact it has, non-monetary, like on social, cultural, or something like that? Is there any impact that gives us that? I mean, any study that shows that kind of impact that mental health has?
Excellent question. You're not hungry, obviously. Now, I refer you to two things. First is the Mental Health Task Force report, which delves in some depth on the question that you have asked. And I also refer you to one of the recommendations by the task force, which effectively is to tell our government that, yes, we must always measure our GDP so that we know where we are doing in terms of the economy and that sort of thing. But we have also recommended to our government that we have a measure, which is what you're suggesting, on the gross national happiness index, which is a completely separate index, which recognizes the fact that you can have a 12, 13% annual growth rate in your per capita. But if you have great disparities in income levels, if you have a great deal of pressure on the people who are producing this, if you're a country that is abusive of its environment, if you're a country in essence that is very rich but does not seem to care for her citizens, then you are as boring as it can be. So we are suggesting that we set up a commission on national happiness to precisely address this. The Kingdom of Bhutan has been doing this for about 10 or 15 years, and it has been shown conclusively that increase on the one hand on the GDP does not necessarily translate into the happiness of a country. So yes, there are studies. I don't think we've done, I can't think immediately of one that we have done here, but globally, the evidence is very clear.
Thank you, Dr.
Okay, good afternoon, Dr. Recently,
Very good afternoon.
We have witnessed an increase in the number of students who are committing suicide. I don't know whether as a task force, a study has been conducted to establish the reason why, and what measures would you advise the government to put in place to curb this trend? Thank you.
Okay. Just for the record, people no longer commit suicide. People commit adultery, commit crimes, and commit other moral things which are very, very, very bad. In this day and age, we talk about death by suicide. And the reason the terminology has changed from committing, which is something offensive, to dying by suicide is the recognition that most of the people who die by suicide have a mental health need. And it's not a crime it's not a crime to have a mental health need. So the terminology, let's get it right. All of you, please, if you don't take anything home today, when you see a newscaster saying that committed suicide, tell him no, they can go and commit crimes and other things like that. As to what the problem is in our country, I think there are maybe 2 or 3 things that are conspiring together. The first one is that we are having better reporting, meaning that previously, people who died by suicide were recorded as accidental deaths. But now our reporting system is more accurate by the police and by other. The second one is that there is a definite overall increase in suicide rate among young people, not just in Kenya, but all over the world. But I think ours are in some cases the most severe. Recently, the World Health Organization released a report that indicates that deaths by suicide in the continent of Africa is much higher than the average for other parts of the world. Now, whether it's directly due to the economic crisis that is inordinate in our part of the world, whether that is because of the pressures we are applying on the children to perform. And I think this is a real and growing problem. I have seen reports indicating that children wake up as early as 4:30 in the morning to go to school, whether it is the teachers who are applying too much pressure, whether it is their parents who tell them, don't come home if you've got a C, that sort of thing. I think our techniques as parents are part of the problem. And then, of course, we have the very serious and ever-present economic and financial reasons for this. But I don't think one can blame one thing and say, this is definitely the one, and if you remove it, all our suicide will go away. I think it's a multiplicity of factors. And again, as a task force, in recommending that the country takes better calculations, if you like, better data on mental disorders in general, is intending to establish the answer to the question that you've just asked.
Thank you, Dr. We have one last question from the online Q&A. I'll read it for you. What would the impact of mental health on life insurance? What would be the impact of mental health on life insurance?
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating question. And this is now exactly the kind of conversation that I would really like to have around a table with insurance underwriters and the actuaries who work around them. From the top of my head, I would believe, and I know I'm right, that it would be in the interest of any person underwriting life insurance to put in place health promotion strategies, mental health promotion strategies, because not only do you mitigate instances of death by suicide, but you are also mitigating the consequences of death associated with delayed diagnosis of mental health conditions. So if I was to advise an underwriter I would tell them, anybody that you underwrite or you propose to underwrite, make sure they are enrolled on a mental health promotion program at your cost. Load it with a premium. And I say from the top of my head that a mental health promotion program would mitigate any losses that one could come across by underwriting life. But as I say, I'm not an actuary, I'm an expert in mental health, but this is my gut feel And I invite anybody with interest in life insurance to call me around the table, and we shall deliberate and hopefully come up with an answer to your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jenga. I think we are going to leave it at that in the interest of time. And at this point, I welcome back our wonderful MC to the stage. It was nice chairing that session, and I hope I've been as liberal as I can get. Thank you very much.
Another round of applause for the paper chair and the amazing. Of course, another round of applause for the amazing Tasmin.